After 10 years of loyalty, 10 years of building systems no one else understood, I was told to train my replacement. The replacement wasn't hired through interviews, wasn't recruited for his experience, and hadn't spent a single night in this building the way I had. He was the boss's son, fresh out of college. No scars, no patience, no idea what it meant to hold a company together when things started to crack. They told me it was a promotion for him, a chance to step into leadership. For me, it was a demotion without the title. I got a desk in the corner, stripped of authority, but still expected to explain everything, to hand over my knowledge like it was just paperwork in a drawer. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I stayed quiet. My name is Michael Carter, 44 years old, senior operations analyst at Greenfield Manufacturing. For a decade, I had been the man behind the curtain, the one who fixed supply chain breakdowns at midnight, who negotiated with vendors when contracts were falling apart, who knew which employees could be trusted and which ones would fold under pressure. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud, but I was steady, and steady was what kept this company alive. When the boss introduced his son, Ryan, to the team, I watched carefully. Ryan had the handshake of someone who had never worked with his hands. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He smiled too wide, laughed too loud, and carried himself like the job was already his birthright. I spent weeks walking him through the systems, explaining processes I had built from scratch. He nodded, pretended to listen, but I could see his eyes drifting toward his phone whenever I spoke. He thought he was above the details. He thought he didn't need them, so I gave him exactly what he wanted. I explained enough to make him believe he understood, but never more than that. I let him think the job was about meetings and numbers, when really it was about people, timing, and invisible connections that only years could teach you. When the day came, they announced Ryan as the new director of operations. The room clapped politely. I got a nod of acknowledgement and a smaller desk in the corner, out of sight, out of mind. They expected me to fade, to accept my new role as a background player. And so I did. Or at least, that's what they thought. I stayed quiet. Just watched. Watched Ryan stumble through meetings, watched him dismiss senior employees, watched him make promises the company couldn't keep. Every mistake he made, I logged in my notebook. Every crack in his confidence, I marked with precision. Because silence isn't surrender. Silence is a mirror. And in that mirror, Ryan was already unraveling. For months later, the sun was gone. And I wasn't. The first week after Ryan took over, the office atmosphere shifted. People were polite, even enthusiastic, because that's what you do when the boss's son walks into the room. But beneath the surface, I saw what they didn't want to say out loud: doubt. The kind of doubt that grows like cracks in glass. Ryan strutted through meetings like he was leading an army, but I knew the numbers he threw around didn't add up. He promised shipping times that couldn't be met, guaranteed savings that weren't realistic, and brushed off questions with a laugh. The team smiled, nodded, and looked at me out of the corner of their eyes. They knew I had the answers, but I said nothing. That was my new role. Silence. Observation. Recording. From my desk in the corner, I watched everything. I kept a small notebook in my drawer, the same kind I had always used for projects, except now it wasn't for projects. It was for him. Every missed deadline, every supplier complaint, every late report, I wrote it down. Not in anger, not in spite, just methodical documentation, the way I'd been trained to do since the beginning. The first real fracture came 2 weeks in. Ryan had promised a major client a production increase without consulting the floor managers. He thought he could push harder and get results. Instead, the machines broke down under the pressure. Repairs cost thousands. Orders were delayed. That client called twice, furious. Ryan blamed the equipment, the staff, anyone but himself. I stayed quiet. But when the dust settled, I made sure to capture everything. Emails, repair logs, timelines. All of it cataloged, neat and precise. I didn't wave it around. I didn't whisper to colleagues. I just kept my records. By the third week, employees were frustrated. Turnover rose. Longtime staff who had survived every storm were now considering leaving. Ryan dismissed their concerns. He said they needed to adapt to change. He didn't understand that these were the people who held the company together when storms hit. Losing them wasn't just a risk, it was a death sentence. I watched him pile mistake on mistake, confident his father's shadow would protect him. He thought being untouchable meant being invincible. He didn't understand that invincibility is an illusion. At lunch one afternoon, I overheard two supervisors whispering about looking for new jobs. They lowered their voices when I walked by. I gave them a polite nod, said nothing, and kept moving. They didn't know I had already noted Ryan's latest blunder in my book, cutting overtime pay without warning. That one would cost him sooner or later. My silence unnerved him. He expected resistance, maybe even confrontation. But I gave him nothing. Just a quiet stare when he made impossible claims, a calm expression when he dismissed reality. That calmness made him uneasy, though he would never admit it. Because silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's weight. And I was letting that weight press down, slowly, steadily, until the cracks widened. For months was all it would take. And I was patient enough to wait. By the end of the first month, Ryan's shine had dulled. The same people who had clapped politely at his promotion now avoided eye contact when he passed. He was still loud, still confident on the surface, but confidence without substance turns brittle fast. I could see it in the way his jokes fell flat, in how his meetings ended sooner than they started, in how he began to pace when the numbers didn't align with his promises. One morning, I walked in early, as I always did. The production floor was already tense. Orders were stacked, machines idle, workers waiting. Ryan had cut the wrong supplier to save money, and the replacement hadn't delivered parts on time. We lost 2 days of work. That was 2 days of revenue, gone. He stormed through the plant, barking at managers, demanding explanations. I stood back, silent, taking notes. That same week, another client threatened to pull their contract. Ryan had promised them a shipment schedule that couldn't be met, not without overtime. But overtime had been the first thing he cut. His arrogance was eating into the foundation I'd spent a decade building. I didn't try to fix it. That wasn't my job anymore. My job was to watch, to record, to stay steady while he unraveled. I began to notice the small things, too. His emails, full of typos and half-finished thoughts, sent at 2 in the morning. His car parked outside later and later each night. The sweat stains on his collar during presentations. These weren't the marks of a leader. They were cracks. Cracks that widened with every passing week. By the second month, he was asking for my help more often, but never directly. He'd send vague emails, CC&G half the office, hoping I would jump in and save him. I never did. I gave him exactly what he gave me: silence. If he wanted my knowledge, he'd have to earn it. And he never did. The staff noticed. They came to me quietly, asking if things would get better, if Ryan was just going through a phase. I told them what I always told them: do your job. Keep records. Stay steady. They thought I was being loyal. In truth, I was building the same wall of silence around them that I had around myself. Ryan's father, the boss, visited more often now. At first, he clapped Ryan on the back, praised his energy and new ideas. But I saw the look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Worry. Regret. The sun he had placed at the top was in over his head, and everyone could see it. Meanwhile, my notebook grew thicker. Every failure had a date, a time, a cost. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was documenting gravity. And gravity always wins. Ryan didn't know it yet, but he was already falling. And all I had to do was stay quiet and watch. By the third month, Ryan's confidence had turned into desperation. He was still loud in meetings, but his words carried less weight. You can only promise the impossible so many times before people stop listening. And they had stopped. The supervisors looked down at their notes when he spoke, pretending to write while really waiting for the meeting to end. The staff nodded along, but the trust was gone. That's when he started making reckless moves. He approved a risky supplier deal without contracts. He tried to cut training programs that had been in place for years, calling them a waste of resources. He even announced a plan to reduce the workforce to boost quarterly numbers, without realizing that production was already stretched thin. Each decision chipped away at the company's foundation, and each one went into my notebook. I didn't interfere. Not once. When asked for my opinion, I simply said, "I'll follow leadership." My words were neutral, but my silence carried weight. It told the veterans on the floor that I was watching, and it told Ryan that I wasn't going to bail him out. That quiet unsettled him more than any argument could. The boss, his father, began showing up more often. At first, he tried to cover Ryan's mistakes, smoothing over client complaints with apologies and discounts. But I saw the strain in his face. The pride he once wore when introducing his son had turned into something else: fatigue, regret. He was realizing that leadership can't be inherited like an old suit. It has to be earned. One morning, Ryan called an emergency meeting. He stood at the head of the table, sweat darkening his collar, papers scattered in front of him. He spoke quickly, too quickly, about new strategies and revised projections. He used big words, but none of them answered the question on everyone's mind. How are we going to fix this? I sat in the corner, silent, watching the room. No one challenged him directly, but the silence in that room was heavier than any argument. People were done giving him the benefit of the doubt. Later that week, I found him in the break room, staring at his phone like it was an enemy. He didn't see me come in. His shoulders were slumped, his jaw tight. He looked like a man waiting for a call he didn't want to receive. When he noticed me, he straightened, forced a smile, and made a weak comment about being under pressure. I nodded once, poured my coffee, and left. Not a word. Because silence wasn't just my shield anymore, it was my weapon. Every mistake he made, every decision that backfired, was amplified by the fact that I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was writing itself in plain view. And soon, even his father wouldn't be able to ignore it. By the 4th month, Ryan was unraveling in plain sight. His voice, once booming with false confidence, now cracked under the weight of his own promises. Meetings that used to last an hour were cut short because he couldn't answer simple questions. The supervisors exchanged glances, subtle but sharp, the kind of looks that say more than words ever could. They didn't trust him, and he knew it. One afternoon, a client arrived unexpectedly, furious about late shipments. Ryan tried to charm his way through it, laughing too loudly, offering vague assurances. But charm doesn't move freight. Numbers do. Processes do. And he had neither on his side. The client left without shaking his hand. The silence in the room after the door closed was brutal. Ryan looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak. I didn't. That was when people began turning to me, quietly, cautiously. A floor manager stopped by my desk, pretending to ask about an old report but really wanting reassurance. An assistant slipped me a note about a vendor issue and asked if I could just take a look. They weren't defying Ryan. Not openly. But they were seeking stability, and stability is what I had always been. I never offered more than a calm nod or a short instruction. Still, they walked away steadier because they knew I saw them. Ryan noticed. He tried to assert himself, demanding updates be sent directly to him, cutting me out of email chains, even moving my desk farther from the center of operations. None of it mattered. You can't erase trust with an order. Trust is built over years, and his 4 months weren't enough to touch what I had already established. The real turning point came during a quarterly review. Ryan stood at the head of the table, presenting numbers that didn't match reality. He talked about growth while production was falling. He promised savings while costs climbed. His father sat at the far end, expressionless, but I saw the pen tapping against the table, slow and steady. It was the sound of doubt. When Ryan finished, the room stayed silent. He looked around, waiting for applause, for validation. None came. Finally, someone asked a simple question about missed shipments. He stumbled, stammered, gave half an answer. His face flushed. He glanced at me, as if daring me to step in, to save him. I didn't. That was the moment the room shifted. People saw the truth clearly. The boss's son wasn't built for this. And the quiet man in the corner, the one who never raised his voice, had been right all along. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just closed my notebook, placed my pen carefully on top, and let the silence speak for me. Because sometimes silence isn't just power. It's a verdict. The pressure reached its peak in the final weeks of Ryan's reign. His mistakes were no longer quiet missteps. They were explosions everyone could see. Deadlines missed, vendors refusing to work with us, clients demanding answers. The company that had run steady for years was now stumbling like a drunk in the dark. Ryan's response wasn't to slow down, to steady himself. It was to double down. He called meeting after meeting, filling the air with empty buzzwords. Innovation, restructuring, efficiency. The more he talked, the less anyone believed him. I sat at the edge of the table, my notebook open, writing only what mattered: dates, failures, consequences. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. My silence was heavier than any words could be. His father started to see it too. He walked the floor more often now, asking quiet questions to managers he trusted. He didn't ask me directly, but I could feel his eyes on me, weighing my stillness against his son's chaos. He wanted me to speak. I didn't. He needed to see the collapse with his own eyes. Ryan, sensing the walls closing in, made one final gamble. He announced a major expansion deal with a supplier overseas, promising it would cut costs by 20%. He made the announcement publicly, without contracts signed, without logistics confirmed. The room clapped politely, but the silence afterward was suffocating. Everyone knew it wouldn't work. Within a week, the deal fell apart. The supplier pulled out after discovering unpaid invoices. Ryan tried to spin it as their fault, but the truth was obvious. He had promised what he couldn't deliver again. That same afternoon, his father called a closed-door meeting. Ryan stood at the head of the table, voice trembling as he tried to explain away the disaster. His father listened, face carved from stone. When Ryan finished, the room was silent. All eyes turned, not to him, but to me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply sat with my notebook, calm, steady. That silence said everything. I had the record. I had the facts. I didn't need to raise my voice, because the collapse was already complete. Ryan looked at me then, truly looked, and I saw it in his eyes, the fear. Not of me, but of what my silence represented. Proof. Judgment. The quiet certainty that his time was over. By the end of the day, whispers spread through the office. Ryan had been removed from his position. Officially, it was a leave of absence. Everyone knew better. For months after he'd taken the job I trained him for, he was gone. And I wasn't. The quiet man in the corner was still standing. And the son who thought he was untouchable had collapsed under the weight of his own noise. The day after Ryan was pushed aside, the building felt different. The tension that had hung in the air for months seemed to thin out, like a storm finally passing. People moved faster, voices were steadier, and for the first time in weeks, I saw small signs of relief on the floor. The sun was gone, and the company could breathe again. But no one said it out loud. Not yet. His father still walked the halls, jaw tight, the weight of the decision visible in every step. Firing an employee is one thing. Removing your own son is another. He didn't need sympathy, and he didn't ask for it. He just moved, focused and silent, like a man stitching up a wound. What surprised me was how quickly eyes turned toward me. A supervisor stopped by my desk, asking if I could review a shipment schedule. Another leaned in to confirm numbers before sending them to corporate. Little things, small requests, but steady. They weren't asking for approval from a director anymore. They were looking to me for stability. I gave short answers, nothing dramatic. A nod, a note in the margin, quiet guidance that kept them moving forward. His father noticed. He came by late in the afternoon, standing at the edge of my desk, not saying a word. He looked down at the notebook I kept open, thick with dates, numbers, and records of everything that had gone wrong. His eyes narrowed, then lifted to mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned and walked away. That was enough. The silence between us carried more weight than any conversation could. He understood what I had done, not sabotage, not rebellion, but patience. I had let the facts write themselves. I had let Ryan collapse under his own promises while I stayed steady. By the end of the week, an email went out. No announcement, no ceremony, just a new reporting structure. Supervisors would now send updates through me before forwarding them to the front office. It wasn't official. There was no new title next to my name, but everyone knew what it meant. The company trusted me again, and I didn't celebrate. I didn't boast. I just adjusted my chair, opened my notebook, and went back to work. That was my way. Quiet, methodical, steady. The same way I had survived 10 years in this place. The same way I had survived 4 months of Ryan. Sometimes the loudest statement you can make is no statement at all. Just the proof of still being here when others have burned themselves out. Ryan had thought the corner desk was a punishment. For me, it was a vantage point. From that quiet corner, I had seen everything. And from that quiet corner, I was still standing while he was gone. The verdict was written, and it had been silent all along. The week after Ryan's removal, his father finally came to me. Not in a meeting, not with paperwork, but quietly, at the end of the day, when most of the office had already gone home. He stood by my desk, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on me like he was measuring every breath. He didn't start with apologies, and I didn't expect him to. Instead, he spoke about the company, about stability, about needing someone who understood not just the numbers, but the people. He said Ryan's failure had shaken trust, and trust was harder to rebuild than profits. His words circled the real subject without touching it. He didn't have to say it directly. I already knew where this conversation was heading. When he paused, waiting for me to answer, I stayed quiet. My silence forced him to keep talking, to lay his cards on the table. Finally, he said it plainly. He wanted me to step in, to take the responsibilities I had always carried unofficially and make them mine again. He offered a new title, more authority, and the acknowledgement that I had earned years ago. I didn't react. No smile, no thank you, no eagerness. I let the silence stretch, and in that silence, I watched him shift slightly, uncomfortable. He was a man used to being in control, and here he was, waiting for me. The quiet had turned the tables. After a long moment, I gave a single nod. Not acceptance, not rejection, just acknowledgement. That was enough for him. He exhaled, almost relieved, and said the paperwork would follow. Then he walked away, leaving me alone at my desk in the corner. That night, I sat at home with my notebook open. I didn't write down the offer. I wrote down the lesson. Noise fails, silence endures. Ryan had tried to lead with volume, with promises, with the illusion of control. And in 4 months, he collapsed. I had led with silence, with patience, with precision. And now, when the noise was gone, I was still standing. The next morning, the supervisors greeted me differently. Not with forced politeness, but with quiet respect. They didn't congratulate me. They didn't need to. They just worked, steadier than before, because they knew someone was holding the line again. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply moved forward, because leadership isn't about speeches or applause. It's about being the one who doesn't break when everyone else does. The company had tested me by replacing me with the boss's son. For months later, I hadn't just survived. I had proven a truth they would never forget. The quiet man in the corner was the one who kept the walls from collapsing. And that truth didn't need a single word to be heard. It didn't take long before Ryan tried to come back. His absence had been called a leave, not a firing, and that left the door cracked open just enough for him to push against it. One afternoon, I saw him in the lobby, suit pressed, smile rehearsed, greeting the receptionist like nothing had happened. His presence sent a ripple through the building. Whispers traveled faster than emails. The boss's son was back. He walked the halls with forced confidence, shaking hands, making small talk, pretending his collapse had been nothing more than a rough patch. But the eyes around him told a different story. The staff wasn't fooled. They had seen him fail, seen him stumble, seen him bury the company under his arrogance. You don't erase 4 months of chaos with a polished smile. When he reached me, standing by my desk, his grin tightened. He asked how things had been running, said he hoped I had kept the ship steady while he was away. The words were coated with arrogance, as if my years of work were just placeholders for his return. I looked at him, calm, and gave no answer. Silence. He shifted uncomfortably, waiting for a reaction that never came. That silence pressed harder than any insult could. He left with a weak laugh, patting my shoulder like he was still in charge. But the room noticed. Everyone noticed. I hadn't moved. I hadn't spoken. And that steadiness said more than words ever could. Later that day, his father called me into his office. The door closed behind me, and he leaned forward across the desk. He didn't waste time. He said Ryan wanted back in, but the board, the clients, the staff, they wouldn't accept it. He admitted he had underestimated the damage, underestimated me. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of a man forced to choose between blood and survival. He asked me directly if I believed the company could endure Ryan's return. I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch. His question hung in the air until it answered itself. Finally, he leaned back, nodded slowly, and said, "That's what I thought." The next morning, Ryan's office was cleared. Officially, he had decided to pursue other opportunities. Unofficially, the silence had made the decision long before. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't in his removal. It was in the fact that I hadn't raised my voice once. I had let the noise destroy itself. Ryan had been trained by me, but he never learned the most important lesson. Power isn't in what you say. It's in what you don't. And now, everyone understood that the quiet man in the corner wasn't replaceable. Not then. Not ever. After Ryan was gone for good, The building settled into a rhythm again. The chaos faded, replaced by the steady hum of people who knew their jobs and trusted each other to do them. For the first time in months, shipments went out on time. Vendors returned calls without hesitation, and clients spoke of trust instead of complaints. The storm had passed, and in the silence that followed, the company began to breathe again. His father never gave a speech about it. He never admitted outright that he had been wrong. But his actions spoke louder than words. Meetings that once centered around Ryan's presentations now turned to me. Questions that used to be brushed off landed quietly on my desk. He didn't have to say it out loud. The acknowledgement was in the way he listened when I spoke, and the way he stopped Ryan from ever stepping foot in the building again. I never gloated. I never told the story of how the boss's son replaced me, only to collapse in 4 months. I didn't need to. Everyone who mattered had seen it unfold with their own eyes. The silence had carried the truth, and the truth didn't need decoration. At my desk in the corner, I opened my notebook one final time. I flipped through the pages, every mistake, every failure, every consequence Ryan had left behind. Then I closed it and slid it into the drawer. The record was complete. The silence had spoken, and its verdict was final. What I learned in those months wasn't new, but it was sharper now. Some men lead with noise. They shout, they demand, they chase attention. But noise fades. It burns fast and dies faster. Others lead with silence. They watch. They wait. They move only when necessary. That kind of leadership doesn't fade. It endures. Ryan thought the corner desk was exile. For me, it was clarity. From that corner, I saw every mistake, every illusion, every crack in the facade. And when the dust cleared, I was still there, quiet, steady, unshaken. I trained the boss's son to replace me. I handed him the keys, gave him the systems, let him believe he was in control. And then I watched. I watched him stumble, watched him collapse, watched him destroy himself under the weight of promises he couldn't keep. For months later, he was gone. And I wasn't. The lesson is simple. Some men win by shouting the loudest. Others win by saying nothing at all. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight for my position. I just stayed quiet. And in the end, silence won. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.